Thank you, Speaker. On behalf of the people of the electorate of Newtown and the Greens, I say to all victim survivors of sexual assault, all those who have been failed by the so-called justice system, all those who have been subjected to sexual violence, domestic abuse, coercive control and sexual assault, that we see you, we acknowledge you, and most importantly, we believe you. Last week, the new sexual assault consent laws enshrining international best practice of a communicative model of consent came into effect in New South Wales. It was a monumental day, a day that finally completed a decades-long campaign by survivors, activists, advocates and allies to end the harm that our laws in New South Wales were causing to those who had experienced sexual violence. It was so powerful to see Saxon Mullins front and centre of the reporting on the day. A young woman, a survivor advocate, a true change maker who gave more than anyone should be required to give to see that these reforms were achieved. I have stood in this chamber on many occasions and congratulated the many, many other wonderful people who have contributed to achieving an affirmative consent model in New South Wales. So I will not list them all again here, but they know who they are. I know they are very, very proud, and you should all know that what you have done is made a massive contribution to law reform in this state. The model of consent we now have in New South Wales makes it much easier for juries, judges, police and prosecutors to understand and apply sexual assault law. And critically, these new laws address the dangerous and damaging issue of rape myths. Myths about how a survivor should look or behave or dress that are widely held, and makes it easier for fact finders to separate these rape myths from actual circumstances of the assault. This is a huge and important reform that will have a massive impact on the treatment of survivors in the criminal justice system. But experts and campaigners and advocates have never been under any delusion that this law reform alone would be enough when it comes to fully addressing the enormous problems we have in our society when it comes to sexual violence, violence against women, and the mistreatment of women and toxic masculinity. Law reform alone cannot resolve these huge numbers of assaults, massive rates of underreporting and dramatically inadequate funding for support services. Law reform alone cannot change how infrequently survivors are believed and properly supported to seek justice. For that, we need a shift in our understanding of how we recognise sexual violence at a societal level. That shift is certainly underway, boosted by the Me Too movement, but what continues to be a huge barrier to progress here is the way that violence and victims of violence are routinely discussed in public discourse and in our public domain, in our so-called justice system, which is still dominated by the patriarchy and steeped with toxic masculinity. The horrific levels of public scrutiny and vitriol levelled at victim survivors who try to seek justice in an often very unjust system can cause significant further harm. The impacts of unrelenting and extremely damaging media coverage and public commentary of high-profile assault cases, coverage and commentary that is so often overtly skewed in favour of abusers who hold an absolute pinnacle of privilege, while the survivor is routinely mocked and derided, should not be underestimated in terms of the negative impact it has on people coming forward. It did not take long before we saw, in a recent high-profile case, the inevitable pile-on, before what began as an unhelpful, sensationalist reporting and commentary became weaponised by those who do not believe survivors, by abusers, sexists, apologists and obsessives who seek to centre themselves with no regard for the harm caused to others. The result is that once again we see rape myths being perpetrated. As public figures with the broad public reach, we have a responsibility to do better, to always centre and support survivors in our response and our reactions to instances of sexual violence. We must all carefully consider the messages we are sending to the next young woman who is abused by a powerful man and recognise that what we say matters. How do our words sound to a survivor who is trying to find the courage to speak up and enter a justice system that we know is so heavily flawed? Our words do have an impact on the public discourse and on survivors. Our words send a message to everyday people that one day may end up on a jury, That is what we need to change. I want to make it clear right now to any survivor who may hear this that the Greens believe you. I believe you. We support you. We are committed to ensuring that you receive justice and to ensuring you get the support you need.